I've always been the quiet type. I avoided trouble, kept to my lane, and favored the simple life. Marrying Jessica was supposed to cement that idea of simplicity. She was everything I wanted: sweet, understanding, and with just enough wildness to keep things interesting. But there was one thing I hadn't realized when I married her: her mother. Margaret, or Maggie, as she liked to call herself, was unlike any woman I'd ever met, let alone a mother-in-law. She was in her 50s, but you could never tell that from the way she held herself. You could almost hear the rumble of a motorcycle when she walked into a room, her energy radiating like the roar of an engine. She was fierce, indomitable, and no doubt wild in a way I couldn't even comprehend. She looked like she could belong to a biker gang: leather jacket, long hair, always tied in a messy braid, and an insatiable need for adventure. That's where the trouble started: Maggie's insatiable lust for life, and the way she made me feel when she was around. I was 23 years old, married to her daughter, but every time Maggie bestowed her half-smirk on me, I felt like a teenager again, trying to impress the cool girl at school. But this wasn't some harmless crush. No. This had gone further than I'd expected. Too far. I'll never forget the day Maggie reappeared in our lives after months of being off the radar. She was in Alaska, doing God knows what, probably racing down icy roads on a Harley or hanging out with some rugged racers. She wasn't the type to send a postcard or call to check up on her. No, Maggie would just disappear, sometimes for months, and then, out of nowhere, reappear, loud as ever, with tales of the road that would make your jaw drop. She'd tell Jessica and I everything over a beer at the kitchen table, throwing her feet up on a chair like she owned the place. Jessica always found it charming. I, on the other hand, found it challenging. One of those evenings, following Maggie's last adventure, things took a turn for the worse. I remember the moonlight shimmering on her leather jacket as she leaned against her motorcycle in the driveway. We were slightly drunk and laughing about one of her Alaska stories, specifically an incident where she was running from law enforcement in the cold town of Seward. Jessica had already retired to the house to rest on the couch, leaving Maggie and I alone. "I long for the freedom of the open roads," she remarked, looking at her motorcycle with a sense of detachment. "Have you ever tried riding one of these?" She pointed at her Harley with a subtle gesture. "No," I admitted. "I've always wanted to, but I've never had the courage to try." Maggie's smile, her crooked smile, and for a second, I was ready to swear I saw a glimmer of something dangerous in her eyes. "Come here," she said, patting the seat of her bike. "I'm going to show you something." I hesitated, looking back at the house where Jessica slept. But Maggie's voice drew me in like the rumble of a motor just waiting for you to start it. Before I knew it, I was sitting on the bike, hands gripping the handlebars, Maggie sliding behind me, her arms wrapped around mine, guiding me to start the engine, and I felt her hot breath against my ear as she whispered instructions. The vibration of the motorcycle coursed through me, and I'd be willing to swear it wasn't just the engine that was making my heart race. We rode around the block, her body pressed against mine as we took tight turns. I could feel the heat coming off of her, mixing with the cold night air, and it stirred something in me that I wasn't ready to admit. When we finally pulled back into the driveway, my nerves were on edge. I jumped off the bike, my heart pounding, and ran my hands over my face. I needed to shake it off. I was married to Jessica, not Maggie. But then Maggie leaned her back against the bike and said something that made my world turn upside down. "Come here," she said, nodding toward her feet. "My shoulders are killing me after all this time in Alaska. Give me a quick massage, will you?" I had to say no. I should have made an excuse, something like it was too weird or that Jessica wouldn't approve. But the truth was that I wanted to. I wanted to touch her, and I did. My hands traveled over her tense muscles, and she moaned in appreciation, her body relaxing under my touch. And that's when I realized we'd crossed the line. The next few weeks were a living hell. Every time Maggie was near me, I couldn't get that night out of my head. I kept telling myself it was a one-time thing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something between Maggie and me that neither of us could ignore. The moment came when she invited me to go on a trip with her. "I'm going on another trip," she remarked, leaning casually on her motorcycle in our driveway. "I'd love the company. Jessica's busy with her work, so I thought it would be nice to invite you." I knew what she was really asking, and I knew I should say no. But I didn't. The thought of riding next to her, of feeling that same excitement again, was too strong to resist. So I said yes. We hit the road on Friday morning, the wind blowing in our faces as we rode north toward the mountains. Riding beside Maggie and watching the landscape sweep past in a riot of colors was exhilarating. We stopped at small motels along the way, just two travelers telling each other stories and drinking late into the night. But it wasn't just about the thrill ride. It was about her. The way she laughed, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention to her. There was something special between us that neither of us could deny anymore. One night, after too much drinking and too many miles on the road, things went too far. We ended up in her motel room, and I realized there was no turning back. That's when it all went wrong. Maggie had always been involved in the shady business, working with bikers selling illegal parts, smuggling goods across state lines. I hadn't realized how deep she'd gotten involved until we were caught in the crossfire of one of her bad deals that evening. We were driving through a small town in the middle of nowhere when a black SUV appeared behind us and chased us for several miles before finally making its move. A gunshot rang out, and Maggie swerved to the side. Her bike skidded, and we tried to get away. We barely made it behind a nearby gas station before the SUV disappeared. Maggie was bleeding from the wound on her arm, but she didn't look stunned. "Shit," she muttered, clamping the wound. "I didn't think they'd come for me so fast." "Who?" I demanded, my heart pounding frantically. "Who the hell is after you, Maggie?" She only smirked, wiping the blood off her hand. "Old friends," she said. "Don't worry about it." But I was worried. I worried because now I was in a deep hole, thrust into a life I never wanted, with a woman I shouldn't have been with. And the worst part was that I didn't know how to get out of it. Things only got more dangerous from here. Maggie's enemies were relentless, and soon we found ourselves on the run. We traveled from town to town, never staying in one place longer than overnight, constantly looking around. I should have gone back to Jessica, should have told her the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I kept running around with Maggie, kept lying to my wife, telling her I was running late at work or away on business. It all ended one night at a run-down bar outside of Anchorage. Maggie had set up a meeting with one of her old biker buddies trying to get out of the mess she'd gotten herself into. But the meeting went south quickly. I remember the lights flickering in the bar as the gunfight began, bottles smashing and chairs flying. I remember Maggie grabbing my hand and pulling me out the back door as bullets whizzed past us. We jumped on her motorcycle and sped off into the night, and that's when I realized I had fallen in love with her. It wasn't just the thrill of the ride or the danger that kept me with her. It was her, Maggie, my mother-in-law, the woman who turned my life around. Now, sitting here in a cheap motel room in the middle of nowhere, I know I have to make a choice. Maggie sleeps next to me, her hand resting on my chest, and I can hear the distant rumble of the highway outside the window. It would be so easy to keep running, to stay in this twisted, dangerous world with her. But I can't. I can't anymore. I love her, but I love Jessica too. And I know that what I've done is unforgivable. I crossed a line I shouldn't have crossed, got involved in something I shouldn't have touched. I'll be back tomorrow. I intend to reveal the truth to Jessica and accept the consequences of my actions. As for Maggie, I'm not sure of her future. She is an unstoppable force, and she will persevere.